I used to think debts were made of numbers, but in Southport I learned they are made of people. They have voices, faces, moods, and they whisper your name until it is no longer yours. My father always said money solves everything. He forgot to mention it first eats everything, your freedom, your pride, your choice. On the morning of my wedding, the sky above Southport City looked the color of ash water. Not quite gray, not quite silver. It felt like the world had been erased overnight and I was walking through its draft. My phone vibrated with a message from my father. Do not forget to smile. The papers will be there. The papers, as if marriage was an errand to be signed and filed. He meant the NDA, the prenuptial, the binding contract, that would reduce our family debt $6.3 million to a manageable shame. I read the number again and again until it felt like a heartbeat I could not quiet. 6.3. A rhythm of surrender. What I did not tell him was that 6 hours earlier, I would found blood on my hands. That was not mine. It happened in the narrow veins of the harbor district, where rainwater tastes like iron. A man stumbled into me out of nowhere, warm, heavy, almost collapsing. His shirt was torn, soaked in blood, and he grabbed me like gravity had given up on him. Headlights swept across the alley. A black SUV rolled past, too slow to be random, too expensive to belong there. He pressed a trembling finger against his lips. Do not breathe, he whispered. His voice cracked around the word. The scent of him was smoke and mint and something metallic. Something close to fear. I held still. When the car lingered, he kissed me quick, desperate, not out of want, but out of necessity, the kind of act that confuses air for survival. Then the moment broke. He muttered, sorry, and vanished into the rain. I stood there, breathing in his absence, wondering if that counted as saving someone. Now it is morning. My reflection looks like someone rehearsing bravery. They call me the debt bride. They call him Alexander Fox, CEO.Air, Southport's favorite cautionary tale. He is the kind of man newspapers photograph like an equation, no mystery, only value. Rumor says he brings misfortune to every woman who touches him, that his relationships end like crash stocks, sudden, silent, irretrievable. I do not believe in curses. I believe in patterns. The Fox estate rises out of the hillside, like something that decided beauty should be intimidating. Glass, marble, symmetry, silence. The staff move with the precision of secrets. At the entrance, Vivian Fox greets me with a smile polished sharp. So you are the comet they keep talking about, she says. Try not to crash here. Her words are sugar with razors in them. I answer with a smile that could mean anything. Behind her, Grandma Eleanor appears a force carved from silver and spine. She leans on a cane that might as well be a gavel. Evelyn, she says, you will call me Grandma. If anyone tries to put you in the servants' quarters, I will put them there myself. Her tone leaves no room for thank yous. I nod. She studies me like an old map, eyes tracing paths no one else can see. The ceremony is held in the conservatory, under glass that traps the sun until it turns white. Alex stands at the end of the aisle, motionless, a man sculpted by restraint. His suit is navy so dark it could be mistaken for midnight. When our eyes meet, recognition flickers not of me, but of control being tested. We exchange vows written by lawyers and translated into romance for the audience. The applause is soft. The camera is kinder than reality. He slides a ring onto my finger without touching skin, as if distance were a form of respect. I tilt my shoulder just enough to hide the small birthmark that sits there like a secret brand. Would you have told him that you were the stranger in the rain, that his blood had once painted your palms? Or would you have waited, like I did, to see what silence might earn? After the ceremony, champagne in my veins and contract in my purse, he speaks for the first time as my husband. Evelyn Hart, he says, flat as a spreadsheet. We will review the documents this afternoon. You will be more comfortable in the lower quarters for now. The words are clean, professional, cruel in their neatness. For now. I almost laugh. Some insults arrive, dressed as hospitality. Before I can answer, Eleanor's cane cracks against the marble. She stays upstairs, she announces. If you want a war, Alexander, start it properly. He looks at her for a long moment, then nods once. As you wish. Would you have fought him right then? Or would you have pocketed that moment like a knife, saving it for when it would cut cleanest? I choose silence. Silence can be loaded. It can wait years without aging. Night comes early to houses like this. I trade lace for shadows, heels for bare feet, and sit at the edge of the bed that smells like furniture polish and inheritance. My phone lights again. The Astor House. 10 p.m., lot 27. Come unnamed. My pulse remembers how to climb. I change into black, tie my hair low, and leave through the staff door. The Astor House is where Southport sells its sins to people rich enough to rename them curiosities. Inside, chandeliers drip gold like honey. Men with cufflinks, instead of consciences, talk softly about acquisitions. Lot 27 sits beneath a single spotlight, a black case with faint green veins. Its lock seamless, its silence heavy. The why Codex. The myth says it holds the secret to eternal life. My mother's letters said otherwise. It does not make you live forever, she wrote. It teaches you how to stop dying so easily. Bidding begins. Numbers leap like sparks. I raise my paddle. Across the room, another bidder joins the movement, so precise I know before I see him. Alexander, of course. We do not look at each other directly, but the air between us strains. He raises. I raise higher. I can feel the crowd lean forward, hungry for spectacle. The gavel falls. The Codex is mine. I turn to leave and find him waiting in the corridor, framed by shadows and gold. Strange, he says softly. People rarely hide their names to buy something they can't open. His voice is colder now, but curiosity glints beneath. Maybe names are keys too, I answer. He studies me. Our marriage does not include rights to my investments. I let the pause breathe. Good, I say. Mine are private. For a heartbeat, something cracks between us, something dangerously close to memory. But then he steps back, mask restored. Would you have told him then, or let him stew in half? Remembered suspicion. I wanted him to recognize me, but not yet. I wanted it to hurt when he finally did. Back at the mansion, I place the Codex on my bed. The lock is not a lock at all. It is an intersection of metals, black with a hint of green, like moss growing on steel. The surface is warm under my fingertips, as if the object remembers human touch. Maybe relics absorb their owners, loneliness. Maybe that is why they hum when you are alone. The door opens behind me. Alex again. Security sweep? He says to the guard before waving him away. His gaze catches on the Codex, then travels to my shoulder. He steps closer. Let us test a theory, he murmurs and reaches. If he moves my hair, he will see it. The small, curved mark, proof of the night we both survived. My pulse trips. I turn casually, pretending to adjust the Codex. I am allergic to cologne, I say lightly. If I break out in hives on our wedding night, your PR team will have an aneurysm. He pauses, then straightens, sliding his hands back into his pockets. We have rules in this house. So do I answer. We do not touch each other's experiments. He almost smiles. Good night, Mrs. Fox. Good night, Mr. Fox. He leaves, and the room exhales. Inside the drawer of the nightstand, I find something that should not be there. A photograph of my mother standing in front of the old Fox Medical Archives. She is younger, hair caught mid-laugh. On the back, in her handwriting, if you are lost, go to Southport. The Foxes owe us an answer. Beneath it, another line in neater script, tell Evelyn where to stand. Signed, Eleanor. When I find Eleanor on the terrace, she is already waiting, a cup of tea in her hand, moonlight carving her profile into something eternal. Your mother was remarkable, she says before I speak. Brilliant women make enemies. The Codex was never meant to belong to a single family. It was meant to save lives. What do you want from me, I ask. Not obedience, she replies. Truth, precision, silence that serves purpose. She studies me. Calm and unflinching. You are not a comet, Evelyn. You are a compass. Do not confuse survival with smallness. Her words lodge somewhere between compliment and command. Would you have trusted her? I want to, but in families like this, kindness is never free. Morning arrives, wrapped in pale sunlight. In the dining hall, Vivian cuts a grapefruit into perfect, bleeding crescents. So, she says without looking up, our dear brother hates losing. You might have just become his favorite adversary. Maybe he needs one, I reply. She laughs softly. Be careful what you offer. He bites. At the end of the table, Alex reads the Wall Street Journal. His expression does not change, but I feel his eyes on me cool, assessing, uncertain. There is something like recognition beneath that calm. He remembers, even if he does not understand what. And maybe that is enough for now. The rest of the day unfolds like a play written by someone who does not believe in happy endings. Staff pass by me with eyes too careful, smiles too trained. Every hallway in this house sounds like it is holding its breath. Alex leaves for the office before 9. The air he leaves behind smells of expensive soap and control. I drink my coffee slowly, pretending I do not see the cameras tucked in the corners of the ceiling. I am learning the architecture of surveillance. It has a rhythm of its own. Later, I visit the old library. Dust floats through light like memory in suspension. I run my hand over the spines of medical journals that belonged to his father Drive. Phineas Fox, the man who funded research no one was allowed to discuss. On the top shelf, a locked cabinet bears the same emblem carved onto the Codex. My mother's handwriting flashes in my mind. They owe us an answer. I take a photo, hide the phone, and keep my face calm. When I turn, Eleanor is standing in the doorway, her presence as deliberate as punctuation. Curiosity, she says softly, is a kind of inheritance, too. I nod. She studies me, then smiles just enough to be human. Dinner at 7. Wear red? It unsettles him. At dinner, the table could seat 15. Tonight there are 4, Eleanor, Vivian, Alex, and me. The air feels rehearsed. Vivian talks about art auctions. Eleanor about politics. Alex about nothing at all. He cuts his steak with surgical grace. When our eyes meet, his expression does not change. But I see the calculation running quietly behind it. He is searching for the pattern. I let him. I know that once he thinks he has found it, I can change it. The conversation drifts toward business. Vivian asks about the Knight Foundation, the charity division managed by their uncle, Damien. The name lands like static. Alex's fork pauses mid-air. He is abroad, he says, expanding partnerships. Eleanor hums, non-committal. Expanding something, she murmurs. I catch the glint in her eyes and file it away. When the plates are cleared, Alex follows me to the hall. His voice is low, private. You are curious about my family, curious about truth. I correct. They're not the same thing, he replies. I glance at him, the faint bruise at his jawline half hidden under stubble. You bleed like everyone else, I say. No curse can change that. He blinks, slow. The silence between us fills with that unspoken night, the one with rain and blood, and a kiss that was not a kiss. You should rest, he says finally. Southport can be exhausting. It already is, I answer. Would you have told him then? I wanted to. But sometimes truth, if given too early, becomes ammunition for the wrong side. After he leaves, I sit by the window. Outside, the garden glows faintly under security lights, geometric and perfect. Beyond it, the city hums with sins of its own. My reflection looks older tonight. The Codex rests beside me, silent, waiting. Noah's encrypted message appears on my phone. We can forge a key. Not real, but convincing. Need close photo of lock. I take it. My hands are steady. Done. He replies, Good. You will get it soon. Do not trust anyone except the old woman. I do not ask which old woman he means. The next day, I find Eleanor again in the terrace garden trimming her roses. Your friend messaged, she says without turning. Noah, he is competent. My breath catches. You are monitoring my phone. I am monitoring your safety, she corrects. In this family, both are the same thing. She hands me a sealed envelope. Inside, you will find your mother's research notes. She worked with Phineas once. The Codex was real then. She tried to replicate part of it. She failed. Or maybe she succeeded too well. I open the envelope later in my room. Inside are sketches, intricate diagrams of human organs, intertwined with symbols I do not recognize, something between alchemy and anatomy. A phrase repeats in the margins. Healing is not conquest. It is return. My throat tightens. I do not know if it is grief or recognition. At midnight, footsteps stop outside my door. A pause, shadow, then silence again. I wait until the sound fades, then slide open the drawer and check the Codex. It is untouched. But a note has appeared on my pillow in handwriting that is not mine. Curiosity kills slower than loyalty. I do not sleep after that. Morning brings sunlight too bright to be innocent. Alex is already in the courtyard, talking on the phone. His voice carries sharp, impatient. I catch words like Damien, shipment, delay. When he ends the call, he notices me. For a moment, something raw flashes across his face, like a man remembering something he was not supposed to feel. "You do not belong in this house," he says quietly. "Then why marry me?" I ask. He hesitates, because sometimes the only way to control chaos is to invite it inside. I almost laugh. "You think I am chaos? I think you might be the only person who is not afraid to be." He turns away before I can answer. Would you have believed him? I do not know if I did. But I felt the shift, the faint tremor that comes before the fault line breaks open. Later, I walk along the East Wing corridor, where portraits of dead foxmen watch with oil-painted judgment. One frame is missing. Its outline leaves a pale rectangle on the wall. I ask a maid about it. She shakes her head quickly. "Removed, madam," she whispers. "By order of Mr. Damien. The air feels heavier afterward." Noah's next message arrives that evening. Key ready. Meeting soon. Need sample of alloy for proof. I stare at the Codex. The lock reflects the window light like a watchful eye. I whisper, "Soon." That night, Eleanor invites me to her study. It smells like cedar and authority. She pours bourbon instead of tea. "You have seen the cracks," she says. "Good! Do not fall into them." She opens a drawer and places a thin file on the desk. Oh, inside are photographs, Damien shaking hands with government officials, warehouse manifests, bank transfers. The Codex is not the treasure. It is the bait. Damien wants what is inside, but he does not understand what it holds. He thinks it is power, it is medicine. If it goes wrong, it can kill. She looks up, her gaze steady. Phineas died, trying to protect it. Your mother helped him. That is why you are here. That is why I brought you back. Everything slows. You brought me here, she nods. I told your father where to send you. Debt was the only language he understood. I should hate her. I do not. Maybe because she is right. Maybe because I needed the debt as much as it needed me. Would you forgive her for that? To know your life's ruin was engineered for a cause larger than you. I do not know if forgiveness fits into this story. When I return to my room, the Codex sits exactly where I left it, but the air smells faintly of cologne, the kind Alex wears. I open the window. Let the wind in. Somewhere outside, a siren wails and dies. My reflection catches my eye again, and for a second, I do not recognize myself. The girl who walked into this house was paying a debt. The woman staring back is collecting one. Before sleeping, I write a single line in my notebook. If they call me a comet, then let me burn exactly where I choose. Then I slide the notebook under the Codex, as if giving the secret somewhere warm to rest. Tomorrow, the real game will begin. The forged key, the meeting, the truth uncoiling like wire. For now, I close my eyes and let Southport whisper through the glass. The city hums like a machine, dreaming of mercy, and I wonder, just before sleep claims me, whether Alex Fox dreams too, or if men like him simply rehearse control until even their hearts forget how to improvise. When I woke the next morning, the world felt rehearsed. The Fox mansion was too still, too symmetrical, like a painting trying to convince itself it was alive. I dressed in silence, my reflection looking more like an accomplice than a woman. On the nightstand, the Codex waited, patient as an animal that knew it would be hunted. I touched its edge. The metal was cool again, no longer warm like before. Maybe it was reminding me that trust fades too. Noah's message arrived precisely at 7. The shadow key is ready. Need physical access for calibration. He attached a photo, a slender shard of green tinted glass molded into the shape of an ancient tooth. It looked fragile and exact, he added. Do not let anyone else touch it. I typed back, I never do. At breakfast, Alex was already seated, his tie knotted in perfect indifference. Vivian talked about an upcoming art gala. Eleanor skimmed a newspaper. And I watched the steam rise from my coffee, pretending it was enough to occupy me. Alex looked up once, his eyes catching mine, and for a moment, neither of us blinked. He was studying me not with suspicion, but with the caution of someone afraid to recognize something familiar. The silence between us had become a territory. Both of us guarded and trespassed at the same time. When Vivian left to answer a call, Eleanor folded her paper. Damien's hosting a charity auction this weekend, she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. He invited the Fox family. Alexander, you will go. Evelyn, you will accompany him. Alex frowned slightly. That is not wise. Neither is pretending wolves are herbivores, Eleanor replied. Then, to me, you will wear the emerald dress in the 3rd closet. It suits you. Alex's voice was, even when he asked. Why her? Because she listens better than you, Eleanor said, sipping her tea. I almost smiled. Later, in the car to the city, the silence between us stretched again. The driver was new. I noticed the slight reflection of his earpiece in the mirror. Alex caught my gaze and said quietly, You do not trust anyone, do you? Should I? I asked. That depends on what you are hiding. His tone was not cruel. It was curious. I wanted to tell him that mistrust is just love, that learned self-defense. But I stayed quiet. At his office, glass and steel rose around us like a cathedral built for ambition. He held the door for me, not out of chivalry, but precision. Inside, Southport's skyline reflected on every surface thousands of tiny versions of us existing without permission. On his desk, a framed photo of his late father looked almost like a warning. My father believed in legacy, Alex said suddenly, catching my glance. He thought knowledge should be contained, protected. But everything he locked away just rotted. His eyes flicked to me. You are thinking of the Codex? I am thinking of rot, I said softly. It starts when people mistake ownership for guardianship. You talk like you have read it. Maybe I have read people. Would you have trusted him? In that moment, his honesty was dangerous because it sounded like mine. By noon, I met Noah in the underground garage of a half-abandoned mall. He handed me a small velvet box. The shadow key, he said. Identical to the real one in size and pattern. But it won't open anything. That is the point. You said you needed calibration. I need proximity to the Codex, not exposure. Damien will want to see proof it fits. Let him. And if he tests it, then run. He hesitated, studying my face. You are shaking. I am thinking, I corrected. Thinking feels like shaking sometimes. Before leaving, he gave me a flash drive. If anything goes wrong, plug this into any of Alex's systems. It will make sense later. I nodded, though sense was already a luxury. The charity auction was held at Harbor Heights, a tower of glass curved like a blade against the sea. The lobby smelled of polished ambition and false benevolence. Damien Knight arrived late, tall, tailored, smiling the kind of smile people wear to funerals they caused. "Mrs. Fox," he greeted, kissing my hand just long enough to insult my husband. "I have heard so much about you. Only good things, I hope. Only things worth hearing." His voice was a velvet rope, soft until it strangles. Alex joined us, shaking his uncle's hand with the warmth of a ceasefire. "You are expanding the foundation," Damien said, eyes glittering. "Philanthropy suits your image. Pity it is such a poor investment." "Some investments are not measured in profit," Alex replied. "Then you are in the wrong business," Damien said, smiling. I watched them, two predators pretending manners were enough to hide their teeth. When Damien turned to me again, I let him. "You have something I want?" he said quietly, almost intimate. "Do I, the Y Codex?" "I recognize its casing. Your husband's security team saw it in your possession." Curious that a bride would collect relics of death. "Maybe I like old things," I said. "They are harder to manipulate." He laughed, low and delighted. "Come to my study after the event. We will talk about preservation." Would you have gone? I knew the trap, but sometimes the only way to survive a game is to pretend you do not see the board. After the event, Alex drove us home in silence. His grip on the wheel was too tight. "What did Damien want?" he asked finally. "A conversation." "About preservation?" His jaw tightened. "Stay away from him." "Why? Are you afraid he will tell me the truth?" "I am afraid he won't," he said. The house was asleep when we returned. I went straight to my room, locked the door, and placed the shadow key beside the Codex. The fake shimmered faintly under lamplight, its green core pulsing like a heartbeat. I wondered if Noah's replica had soul by accident, or if he had built one on purpose. I touched the Codex with the tip of the shadow key. It fit perfectly, a promise carved from deceit. I smiled for the first time that day. Lies, when crafted well, can look a lot like faith. The next evening, I entered Damien's study. His assistant, Rosa, greeted me nervously before closing the door. The room smelled of sandalwood and strategy. Damien poured 2 glasses of wine. "You brought it," he said, gesturing to the case I carried. "I brought a question," I replied. "What makes knowledge dangerous?" he smiled. "Its audience." He took the case, examined the lock, and then the key. "Perfect fit," he murmured. "Where did you get it, inheritance?" I lied. "The Codex chooses its keeper." "Does it?" he said, slipping the key into the lock, not turning it, just testing the weight. "And what does it want from you?" "To finish what was started." "You sound like my brother," he said, laughing softly. "Phineas died, thinking he could outsmart bloodlines. Do not make the same mistake." "Would you have shown fear?" I did not. I matched his gaze until he blinked first. Then I smiled, like a woman who had already chosen her weapon. When I left, Rosa slipped a note into my hand. "He is keeping something in the vault behind the painting. Ask about project, Aegis." My pulse stuttered. Outside. Alex was waiting by the car. "What did he say?" he asked. "That knowledge kills," I answered, "and that He is not done trying. His hand brushed mine when he took the case from me. The contact was brief, but it burned through the night. He looked at me then, really looked, and something in his expression softened like ice beginning to remember water. "You are hiding more than I thought," he said quietly. "So are you." "Then we are even." "No," I said, "we are not." He did not ask what I meant. Maybe he did not want to know. That night, I dreamed of the alley again, the rain, the blood, the taste of fear turning into warmth. Only this time, when the man said, "Do not breathe," it was not him. It was me. I met Noah 2 hours before sunset in the kind of cafe that survives by pretending it is not there. All chipped tile and coffee that tastes like determination. He set a cloth pouch on the table and spoke without looking up. "Microline, single mode. If you can feed the vault's optical port for 90 seconds, I can handshake the air-gapped controller from the van outside." Rosa says the wall panel is pressure sprung and the alarm loop takes 8 seconds to rearm after a manual reset. 8 seconds is a mercy if you are not thinking. "Are you thinking?" I told him thinking was all I had. He slid me a ring so slim, it disappeared on my finger. "Sapphire lens," he said. "Looks like jewelry. It is a camera. When Damien opens the painting, tilt your hand to the frame. I will see enough to model his timing." I wanted to ask why he was shaking, then realized it was me. "When the door opens," Noah added, "keep your breathing even." The vault's mics are hypersensitive. Sudden breath spikes can flag a log. "You are joking." "I wish," he said. "Buy yourself the smallest fear you can carry. The big ones get noisy." He left by the back, a shadow with good intentions and a bad forecast. I walked to Harbor Heights alone, practicing silence like a language I wanted to speak fluently. Southport glimmered like it had swallowed a star and was trying not to spit. Inside the lobby, the receptionist knew my name without asking. The elevator knew my floor the way a cemetery knows it's dead. Rosa met me at the door to Damien's private suite. Her lipstick bitten off, her knuckles white. "He is in a mood," she whispered. "A donor canceled. He blames the weather." "Is there weather?" I asked. "There is always weather," she said. And then she was gone. Her perfume, a brief apology. Damien's study looked exactly as it had, sandalwood. Books spined with pretense. The painting of a storm-tossed harbor hung between 2 narrow columns like a portrait of appetite. He stood at the bar, back to me, pouring something red into 2 glasses. "Mrs. Fox," he said without turning. "Or should I call you Evelyn? We are past the point of titles." "Do not you think. Call me what tells you the truth," I said. He turned with a smile that mistook itself for intimacy. "Then I will call you Necessary." He handed me a glass. It smelled like berries and threats. "You brought the Codex," he said. "I brought the possibility of trust," I answered, and set the case on the desk. "You know what possibility does to men like me?" "It keeps you awake," I said. "It makes you greedy." "It makes me honest," he corrected, and slid the shadow key from my hand with a tenderness that felt obscene. "Shall we?" He brushed the painting's gilt edge. I tilted my ringed hand, so the blue tip kissed the frame. The sapphire lens blinked to life and watched the hinges hum awake. The canvas shifted sideways with a sigh, as if relieved to be done pretending. The vault face was brushed steel, unmarked except for 4 rotating bezels and a narrow slit of black glass. Damien's finger hovered above the bezels like a man about to play an old song. "Every secret deserves choreography," he said, and spun the rings in 3 looping sequences that refused sense, a waltz taught by paranoia. He leaned in and breathed onto the glass, fog blooming just enough to show the faint, embedded optic receptor. "Say hello to the eye," he murmured. "It never sleeps." He slid the shadow key into the slit without turning. The fit was perfect, the lie a straight line. I kept my breath quiet, steady, the way a diver counts heartbeats underwater. "Are you holding yours with me now, or did you let it go when the painting moved?" "Would you have stepped closer or farther away?" I took 1 more inch forward. "It is beautiful," I said, and he smiled like men do when they are being flattered correctly. "I knew you would appreciate craft," he said. He pressed his thumb to the bezel rim just off center, as if pain was a coordinate and the vault emitted a low tone that pulsed in my bones. He withdrew the key, returned it to me as though returning a favor to its rightful owner, and the painting glided shut. "Saturday," he said. "We open it together. Bring the Codex. Bring your courage." "Which weighs more?" I asked. "Courage," he said. "It always weighs more going in." I left with the case under my arm and the ghost of his tone still humming in my ribs. In the elevator, I raised my ringed hand and studied the tiny film of fog I would stolen for Noah. My reflection looked like someone who was getting good at theft. Outside, the wind had opinions about the ocean and expressed them loudly. I crossed the plaza to where a delivery van idled with a logo for a florist that did not exist. The side door slid open. Noah dragged me in and shut the day out. "You gave me everything," he said, eyes bright. Door timing, port specs, the way he touches the 3rd ring, it is a pressure bias. He is compensating for a stuck bearing. The optic slit is mapped to a single fiber. If we can slip a microline flush into that cavity, I can ping the controller and ghost the log. "English," I said. "We can make the door think it saw itself." He grinned without joy. "We need 90 seconds. He will be there." "So will you," Noah said. "And so will the wrong kind of silence if we miss our window." "How loud is the wrong kind?" "It looks like men with guns." On the drive back up the hill, Southport played its usual symphony sirens, brakes, the low roar of money moving. When we reached the estate, the sky had gone the color of old pearls. Alex stood on the balcony, jacket off, sleeves rolled, his phone abandoned on the table beside him. He looked like a man who had remembered too late that he has a body. "You went to Damien," he said. "You knew," I replied. "Rosa tells me what I need," he said, "and sometimes what I do not." "Do you ever resent being saved?" He blinked, slow. "Is that what you think you are doing?" I stepped closer, stopping when the distance felt deliberate. "I think I am choosing where I burn," I said, "and I think you are trying to learn how." He smiled without his mouth. "You perform, meaning the way other people perform niceness," he said. "It is more dangerous." "Are you afraid? I am curious," he said. "Curiosity is just fear with better posture." A muscle moved in his jaw. "Saturday," he said. "You won't go alone. You can't be there." "Watch me," he answered, and turned away, so I would not see the part of him that wanted the word. We were not allowed to say yet. That night, I lay on top of the covers with the Codex open, only in my mind. I recited my mother's line, "Healing is not conquest, it is return," until it became a drum I could march behind. Around 2 a.m., a shadow crossed my doorway and stopped. Alex's voice came through the wood, barely formed. "You are awake. You are too." A long pause. "I keep remembering the rain," he said, as if speaking to no one. The taste of metal, the way someone's breath can feel like air after drowning. If you had been me, would you have opened the door? I did not. I let the memory hold both of us from both sides. I said it was not raining, and listened to his laugh arrive and cut itself off. "Good night, Evelyn," he said, and the hallway swallowed him whole. Saturday waited like a held breath. We spent Friday pretending to be people who theme their hours around normal verbs. Vivian took me to a dress fitting, but was too distracted to be cruel. Her phone lit up with messages labeled only by initials. Eleanor convened tea with a senator who wore his conscience like a tie clip. Alex disappeared into meetings and came back with a silence that looked like sleep deprivation. When he finally told me Damien's invited a small audience, I felt my pulse recoil. An audience for what? Power, he said. He prefers witnesses when he plans to erase them. Is that a joke? I do not make those, he said. Saturday arrived with sun that behaved like forgiveness. We drove to Harbor Heights in 2 cars, because optics move faster than tires. Rosa met us in the corridor outside the study. Her palms damp. "He is in a theater mood," she whispered. "He likes to say the word legacy before he breaks something. What will he break?" I asked. "You," she said, then shook her head. "No, not you. Not if you are as mean as you look." "I am meaner," I said, and meant it as comfort. Inside, Damien waited beside the painting. 3 men stood by the door in suits designed to be mistaken for furniture. "Alexander," he said, as if greeting a neighbor at a garden party. "And Mrs. Fox. No need for lawyers, I hope. We brought silence," Alex said. "It travels lighter." Damien chuckled. "Open it," he told me, stepping back as if granting me a stage. I set the Codex case on the desk, eyes on the frame. My hand tilted just enough for the ring to see what I already knew by muscle. The lower edge of the gilt was warmer. The pressure point would yield with a sigh. I pressed. The canvas slid. Beneath it, the steel face glared like a secret that had grown tired of being coy. "You lead," Damien said. "Show me your courage." I let the shadow key graze the slit, just enough to kiss it into readiness. "Now," I whispered, but the word was not for him. The microline lay coiled under the bracelet at my wrist, like a thought I had not decided to have. I palmed the thread, felt it tremble between my fingers, and found the optic mouth by memory. Noah's voice cracked in my ear from the bone mic hidden under my hair. "I see you," he said. 40 seconds. The thread seated with a faint click. I hope only I heard. The vault hummed recognition, the way a sleeping animal twitches at its name. 30. Damien's breath moved behind me, close enough to iron the hairs along my neck. 20. Alex shifted his weight. The floor learned a new lesson in pressure. 15. I thought of my mother, of Eleanor's cane, of the kiss that was not. 10. The slit flashed once, a minuscule beat. 7. Is your breath even? Mine was not. I made it be. 3. Now, Noah said, and the hum leveled. Flatline clean. I withdrew the thread. The door knew what it had seen because we told it so. Would ya day? I asked Damien, handing him the shadow key with a smile that had learned how to be polite and poisonous in the same second. He inserted it and paused, savoring the idea that control might feel like music. Then he turned. The mechanism whirred, the ring spun, and the seal released with a sound like someone letting go of a dangerous hope. Inside, not shelves of gold or dossiers stacked like crimes, but a narrow space with a single steel box, no larger than a coffin for a child's bad dream. Cables coiling from its belly into the wall where a glass node pulsed faintly. Damien cracked it open like a chest surgeon and lifted out a hard case drive wrapped in gray foam. Project Aegis, he said reverently, setting the drive on the desk as if it were a relic from a church that still believed. My brother died, claiming it was poison. He did not realize poison is only medicine mispronounced. He gestured to a terminal on a side, credenza, pristine, isolated, a machine with no interest in the internet. Shall we read? He slotted the drive. The screen bloomed with a login that looked like it wanted to be holy. Rosa flinched. Alex took one step forward. The men in suits fingered the idea of their guns. I stood very still, the way deer do before they decide to run or ruin the car. Password, Damien said, eyes glittering. Of course I know it. I wrote it. His fingers hovered over the keys, then rapped out 8 characters I memorized without meaning to. The screen accepted him like a sin it had been waiting for. Folders butted open. Alpha, beta, therapeutics, trials, incidents. And beneath them a directory labeled Seafall that flashed red for a second, then calmed. Pick your poison, he said, and opened incidents. Reports bloomed dates, coordinates, clinical language that tried and failed to make horror behave. School children. Prenatal trials. A prototype immune modulator tested offshore under a charity visa no one would ever audit. Photos blurred beyond recognition, as if pity had belatedly learned digital technique. You see, Damien murmured, delighted. Scale. Alex's voice broke for the first time. A fine crack through tempered glass. You killed people. I accelerated outcomes, Damien said. Southport's problem is that it confuses procedure with progress. The Codex promises protocols. We can reverse engineer. The world does not need saints. It needs shepherds. It needs witnesses, I said, and let my hand fall to the pocket where Noah's drive waited like a loaded feint. Damien turned toward me. Amusement, flickering. And what would you do with witness? Run to the press. To your grandmother's friends with their small subpoenas and smaller mortgages. Do you know how long it takes to turn outrage into law? Long enough to bury the dead twice? Then do not die, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. It is inefficient, he laughed, delighted by my insolence. Read me, Evelyn. Tell me if you find me monstrous or merely modern. He opened another folder. Aurora schematics for device scale, gene delivery, arrays that looked like jewelry until you knew what they did. Somewhere in the room a phone vibrated. One of the suits glanced down, then up, eyes narrowing. Rosa shifted her weight. Noah's whisper hit my ear like a pebble on glass. We have it, he said, mirrored, encrypted, time-stamped. I am burning the log now. How much? I breathed, not moving my lips. Everything that matters, he said, and something that might matter more. What? Miles Knight, he answered. For a second, the room retilted. What did you just say, Alex? Noah said. That is the name attached to a buried access list. M. Knight. Eleanor leveled him off the books. He is the heir, legally buried to protect him. I thought you knew. The floor steadied because I ordered it to. I watched Alex's face and saw nothing new, because he had always been 12 names at once, and 4 of them had learned how to lie to the others. Close it, Damien said, snapping the drive from the terminal and sliding it back into its phone with a tenderness that made me want to break his hands. I do not share my gospel for free. He nodded to a guard. The painting whispered home. The vault ate the box. The seam erased itself, as if we had imagined the whole thing. Saturday is a good day for sacraments, he said. Bring the Codex to me tomorrow. Noon. We will translate its religion together. And if I do not? I asked. Then I will build my own God, he said, smiling. From smaller bones, we left to the symphony of unspoken alarms. In the hallway, Rosa brushed past me and pressed something into my palm, a keycard with a corner cracked. If you need to run, she mouthed. Alex did not speak until we reached the car. You played him, he said, not accusing, not praising. We played him, I corrected. Eleanor did, he said. And for a second, I saw the boy in him, the one who had learned too early that survival can feel like betrayal if you squint wrong. What is Miles Knight? I asked, keeping my eyes on the blur of buildings. He let out a breath that had lived inside him for years. A rumor with my face, he said. Eleanor wanted me unkillable. She thought names were armor. Sometimes they are cages. Do you trust me? I asked, because the dark had decided to be honest, and I wanted to be as rude. Ask me tomorrow, he said. Ask me after we decide who we are. Night thickened around the estate, like a thought that does not want company. Eleanor waited on the terrace, the city in her gaze, like a patient who needed bad news served with precision. I told her what we would seen. She told me what I would missed. Aegis is not just a project, she said. It is a corridor. On the other end is a sale. The buyer is a man who believes borders are a rumor. He will pay in promises and off-book immunity. We have copies, I said. Copies require belief, she answered. We need theater. We need a public so loud even the deaf hear. And Miles, I asked. Her eyes softened around edges that never soften. He was born to a house that eats its sons, she said. I renamed him in the hope he would come home to himself. He did, I said. He just took the long way. I did not sleep. I lay on top of the covers with the Codex beside me and counted the oldest truths I knew. Breath in, breath out. Door open, door shut. Love as a verb that does not ask permission. At 4, a storm rolled in from the harbor and erased the stars. At 6, I dressed in black and tied my hair high the way my mother did when she wanted a scalpel to feel welcome. At 8, I walked into the dining room and found Alex already there, pouring coffee with hands that had not forgotten how to shake. If this goes wrong, he said, and stopped, the sentence abandoning him like a friend who was not built for mornings. If this goes wrong, I finished, we still decide who we are. He nodded, and for a moment we were two people who did not owe a city anything. Noon arrived like a drumline. We returned to Harbor Heights, carrying less than we needed, and more than we could bear. The guard scanned us with a wand that hummed against my ribs. Rosa met us with eyes that asked forgiveness for things she had not done. Damien opened the door wearing a suit the color of dry blood and a smile he had ironed. "Religion time," he said cheerfully. "Mrs. Fox, your offering." I set the Codex on the desk and watched his hands. He traced the case as if it had a pulse, then found the lock with the certainty of a man who thinks doors exist to confirm him. He set the shadow key against the slit again, savoring the prelude. "Not yet," I said, pretending to be precious. "You promised me trust. Is not this enough?" He asked. "No," I said. "Faith is a bridge. I want to see the other side." He laughed and threw me a glance that was half affection and half appetite. He slid the painting aside with his knuckle, and all the rehearsed precision unfolded. Bezels, breath, slit, the vault singing, yes. He did not notice the tiny scuff I left as I seated the microline. He did not feel Alex step half a foot closer to the guard. He did not hear Rosa's breath clip once like a bird misjudging a window. He only saw his door learning his name again. "Did you hold your breath?" "I did. I always do, right before the world decides its next verb." The slit blinked. The hum flattened. Noah's voice threaded my skull. "We are in," he said. "We can map, mirror, and move." "On your word." "Move," I whispered. Damien turned the shadow key. The vault released. The box came out. The drive kissed the terminal, and the screen confessed everything again, obedient as guilt. "Pick your psalm," he said, and opened Seafall. Contracts. Transfer schedules. A date stamped 3 days from now. A port I knew. A cargo marked as reusable medical equipment under the aegis of a charity I would donated to in college because the brochures had beautiful children on them. I saw the price, the signature block, the buyer's alias, and beneath it an authorization initialed MN. My throat forgot how to be a throat. "Miles Knight," Damien said lazily, catching my glance. "A ghost in our machine. A darling of Eleanor's. Do not worry. He never existed long enough to die." Alex did not move. He did not blink. He just unlearned something private and did not let the room see. "Copy complete," Noah said. "Logs burned?" 2 minutes to ghost. "What does ghost mean?" I asked. "It means they will never prove you were here," he said, "but they will feel your absence." Damien closed the folder with a flourish. "Enough literacy," he announced. "Let us eat divinity." He set his hand to the Codex lock as if he were about to undress someone. "Holy!" I moved first. "Stop," I said, and poured my voice through the room, the way light pours itself through stained glass. Everyone turned. Even the weapons. "We do this my way," I said. "Or I take it into the street and read it to the first camera I find." "Do you want a trial or an autopsy?" "Evelyn," Alex said, "a warning, a prayer." "Let me translate," I said, eyes on Damien. "You can either be the villain of a story with endings," I pointed at the terminal, "or the footnote of a story that does not end. Choose wisely." His smile thinned, recalculation cracking through enamel. You think I'm afraid of witnesses? No, I said. I think you are afraid of evidence. For one heartbeat, the room held its posture. Then he laughed. Genuine, thrilled. Oh, I like you, he said. Let the world see. It forgets so beautifully. He leaned close, his breath a wine-stained kindness, and whispered, Bring me the key tomorrow anyway. I want to see how you tell the truth when you are out of lies. We left with the Codex, our backs bare as altars. In the elevator, the numbers counted down like a mercy. Alex spoke first. You should not have said autopsy, he murmured. He adores theatrical metaphors. I know, I said. I brought one to starve the others. He glanced at my hand. You were shaking, he said. Only where no one could see. At street level. The florist van rolled to the curb, Noah's face pale behind glass. He handed me a slim drive, the color of thunder. Everything, he said. With a bow. Where does it go? I asked. Everywhere, Eleanor said from the back seat, as if she had been there the whole time. Southport courts. Federal task force? One very bored reporter who has been waiting 5 years to repay a debt to my husband's ghost. She looked at Alex. And to your father. We drove toward the hill while the city rehearsed what it would become when morning turned into memory. I sat between a woman who had taught me that silence can be an instrument and a man who was relearning his name in real time. I thought of the Codex, closed and warm, and of the children in the blurred photos, whose faces the law had tried not to learn. I thought of rain and a kiss that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with air. Tell me, if you had to choose, would you hand the truth to the world and hope it learned how to hold it? Or would you keep it in your lap and sing it quiet until it grew teeth? By the time we reached the estate, I had my answer, though the story might still punish me for it. Eleanor took the drive the way people take a newborn, reverent, terrified. Alex stood with his hands in his pockets, like a man whose spine is holding him hostage. Miles, I said softly, and felt him flinch at the sound of the ghost. Do not, he said. Not yet. When the name feels like a road home instead of a trap door. I nodded. Then tonight, you can be the man who bleeds and still signs his name, I said. He looked at me as if I would open a window where there had not been a wall. And you can be, he asked. The woman who chooses where to burn, I said, and who to warm. He did not touch me. I did not touch him. The air between us did the math and did not show its work. In my room, I set the Codex down and wrote one line in my notebook, without stopping to breathe. If healing is return, then let me return what was stolen breath to the voiceless, names to the erased, power to the places that forgot they could say no. I closed the notebook and turned off the light and lay in the kind of dark that does not frighten because you have built it. Yourself. The storm moved offshore, arguing with the moon that had other plans. Somewhere in the house, a man practiced being Miles until the name loosened its teeth. Somewhere in the city, a woman opened an email from a burner account and pressed play on a video that would teach Southport how to hear its own silence. And in the space between breath and sleep, I asked you the only question that still mattered. Would you watch with me when the light arrives? Or do you prefer the part where we stand in the dark and decide who we are first? I woke to sirens braided with gulls. the harbor sounding like a courtroom that never adjourned. And for a minute, I did not know whether the noise was outside or inside me. Southport does not change its face when the truth shows up. It changes its lighting. By 8 a.m., every channel wore a new shade of urgency, anchors shaping their mouths around phrases like whistleblower cash, offshore trials, Aegis leaks, and charitable fronts compromised, as if syllables could disinfect a wound. I watched a reporter I recognized from Eleanor's address book hold up blurred images we had seen in Damien's vault, the ones I still saw when I closed my eyes, and I felt the room tilt as public outrage tried to stand without a handrail. You would think release would feel like air after drowning. It felt like the moment you break surface and waves slap you anyway. Alex Miles came to the doorway with a phone pressed to his ear, and the kind of stillness you usually only see in people who learn to be statues before they learn to be boys. Federal task force is in motion, he said when he hung up. The Attorney General wants a sealed briefing. Eleanor is in her study with counsel. Damien's legal team is pretending to be surgeons for a patient they already know is dead. And you? I asked. Me, he said quietly. I am trying to choose a name that won't betray us before lunch. I almost told him there is no safe name, only names that bleed slower, but I kept the thought as a bandage for later. We ate nothing and pretended it was breakfast. Vivian appeared with a robe over silk and the look of someone who had just learned how far a rumor can run when you give it good shoes. Every board is calling, she said, half to Alex, half to the ceiling. They want assurances, resignations, confessions, and a 12-step plan to cleanse their consciences before quarter end. Tell them to stop using the word cleanse, I said. It makes them sound like they are preparing a crime scene. She glanced at me, then at Alex, then back. Is she always like this? Only when breathing, he said. And something like a smile touched the corner of his mouth and died there. Too shy to stay. The first crack in the morning arrived as a polite knock, 2 agents in suits that smelled like airplane air and authority. Eleanor met them at the door with a posture that had already won and was willing to prove it again. They asked for a voluntary statement. She gave them a syllabus. She spoke of philanthropic shells and shipping lanes, and the habit wealthy men have of mistaking offshores for absolution. She did not say the word family. She did not say the word grandson. The agents' pens moved like insects on glass. When they asked about her role, her mouth did an elegant thing I had seen only in courtrooms and marriages. I was a custodian of tradition, she said, and tradition, agents, is polite shorthand for a series of decisions no one wants to own. If you were me, would you have loved her for that precision or feared it? I did both. When the agents left, Eleanor poured bourbon into 3 teacups and called it resilience. We have 48 hours before the buyers shift to new channels, she said, staring past the terrace at a line of ocean that had not read the news yet. The task force will move on Aegis, but they will do it in a way that allows certain reputations to survive. That cannot be our only outcome. You will push them, Alex said. I will embarrass them, she replied. Embarrassment is the one tool that moves at the speed of money. She turned to me. And you, Evelyn, will do something far more difficult than leaking. You will hold. Hold what? The Codex, she said, and the moral authority to say when it opens and when it does not. My laugh came out wrong. I do not have moral authority. You have grief, she said. Use that. It is louder than any press conference. By noon, the city had grown a second heartbeat. Protesters gathered outside Harbor Heights with signs that said, "First, do no harm," and "We are not your trials." And someone taped a grainy photo of Damien's smiling face on the revolving door with a caption that made the marble look ashamed. Police formed lines that looked like commas in a sentence no one wanted to finish. Anonymous accounts posted flight manifests. Other anonymous accounts posted threats. Noah sent me a message that read, simply, "We are seen. Move like you deserve it." He attached a second note, "If anything happens to me, look under the name Parliament." It is not what it sounds like. I asked if he was safe. He replied with a thumbs up that felt like a child holding up a life jacket in a flood. The counterstrike arrived in the manner of all expensive evils. Legal first, personal second, violent if convenient. Our counsel forwarded a motion claiming the leaked files were fabricated. The same motion contained metadata only someone inside Damien's circle could have provided, as if to warn us they still held angles we had not learned how to see. At 2, Vivian's car alarm screamed and then died mid-wail. When she came inside, her hands trembled, and she did not bother to hide it. "They put a dead fish on the hood," she said, voice small, furious. A marlin. From the Knight Foundation's Aquarium Gala. "They are telling everyone, we kill what we pretend to save." Eleanor's jaw tensed. She did not go to the window. "Good," she said. "Let them work in symbols. It means they have run out of contracts." By 3, the first story questioning the leak's timing appeared. By 3:15, another story questioned my motives. By 3:30, a blogger had decided I was a paid actress planted in the Fox household to destabilize the market for fun. "Do we answer?" I asked. "No," Eleanor said. "We make it cost more to lie than to listen." She handed me a folder. Inside were black and white photocopies, the kind that smell like warmed plastic and old promises. My mother's notes, annotated in Eleanor's tight script, mapping clinical observations to hand-drawn diagrams, looping back to a single conclusion in different words. The Codex is a practice, not a prize. It is not a miracle, I said. It is discipline. And discipline, Eleanor said, is the one miracle that scales. The knock at 4 was not a knock. It was a text from an unknown number containing a live location pin, and the words, "Come alone, if you want this to end without blood." Beneath it, a photo, Rosa, captured mid-turn in a parking garage, eyes widened, mouth half open around a breath, a hand in the frame grasping her elbow too hard. I felt my blood choose between heat and ice and decide to be both. I showed the phone to Alex. He swore softly, a word that had probably learned good manners and forgot them. "It is a trap," he said. "Of course," I said. And he stared at the pin, and we lay our own. The lot was 4 miles from the estate, under the skeleton of an overpass where Southport piles its exhaust and regrets. We took separate cars and arrived as if by accident, staggering entry like people who still thought chance mattered. I wore sneakers and a calm face and a jacket heavy enough to hide fear. Alex wore a name that fit too tightly and a mouth that no longer practiced indifference. Noah's van idled a block away. He would text it, "Audio only. Cameras will get you hurt." If you had been me, would you have walked down into that concrete bowl? I did. I counted each stair and told myself numbers could be friends if you kept them honest. Rosa stood beside a column painted with decades of graffiti. Her lipstick was perfect. That is how I knew something was wrong. "You came," she said, and then her voice broke on an apology. "He said he would kill my brother." "I know," I said, even though I did not. Where? A shadow peeled from the deeper shadow. Damien, of course. In a suit that should have looked ridiculous under sodium light, and did not. "You leak," he said, smiling. "You posture. I grow bored. Give me the Codex, and I will spare the parts of your life you still mistake for private." "What parts are those?" I asked. "He knows your name," he said to Alex without looking at him. "The one that matters. Miles Knight. It lands so well on a subpoena." Alex did not speak. Silence was the language he had mastered best. Damien's men stepped from behind columns. 3, then 5, all with the tidy menace of people who are paid by the hour to be permanent. "This is sloppy for you," I said. "Public, loud. You never perform without an editor." "Consider it a rehearsal," he answered, "for a bigger stage. The court? History," he said. "It is kinder to men like me than you would think." Noah's voice murmured in my ear, a ghost hiding inside the ear cuff. "We have 2 minutes before a patrol swings by. If you can keep him talking, I can spoof his phones and trace an uplink." "Parliament keeps pinging. I think it is a private relay. If we catch it, we might unwrap his buyer." I took a step toward the edge of the circle the men had formed, just enough to be a mistake if they wanted it. "Do you know what the Codex actually says?" I asked Damien. "Beyond the myths you sell yourself when you can't sleep." He tilted his head. "Enlighten me." "It says healing is return," I said. "Not conquest. You are trying to conquer a body of knowledge that was never meant to be conquered." "It will make you stupid," he laughed, delighted. "Ah, morality. The last refuge of the temporarily powerful." He nodded at Rosa. "Tell our guest where your brother is." Tears tracked the perfect lipstick line. She did not wipe them. "At home," she said, "watching cartoons." "He does not know anything. Please." "See," Damien said, "my mercy is efficient. Your reluctance is not." He extended a hand. "The Codex, dear." "I do not have it," I said, and watched him smile at what he thought was a bluff. But I brought something better. I raised my phone and showed him the lock screen only. The time, the battery, the network. His eyes flicked fast, greedy. "Parliament," I said. "It is not a club or a congress or a bird. It is your buyer's relay. We see it. We see you." For a second, something moved in his face. A small correction, as if a pianist had heard a note go sour on a good instrument and loved it anyway. Then he clapped once, softly. "Adorable," he said. "Make-believe for grown children. Mrs. Fox, I have been kind to you because I admire ambition when it has the courage to bleed. Do not mistake admiration for restraint. Then do not mistake my silence for consent." I said. "I never have," he answered, and snapped his fingers. The man nearest Rosa yanked her forward, hard. Alex moved at the same time I did. And for a breath, the scene became arithmetic. 3 steps, 2 hands, 1 intention. The first blow landed on a wrist that expected obedience. The second tangled a gun with a coat. The third was the kind of collision that reminds men their bones are not theories. I do not remember deciding to be violent. I remember refusal wearing my body. Tires hissed above, the patrol's approach, or maybe the city turning a page. Noah whispered, 30 seconds, and I have Parliament. Hold. Would you have held? Would you have let the seconds grow teeth and chew you just to catch something that might change the end of the story? I held. Alex pulled Rosa behind a pillar. Damien watched the choreography with a curator's eye, as if bravery bored him unless it was framed correctly. Then he stepped back into the darkest seam of the light and was gone. He is moving, Noah said. He left a ghost hand. He is good, but I have it. Parliament resolves to a satellite bounce, leased by a shell that lives inside a fund, that lives inside a church. A real church. And guess what? It funds. Say it, I whispered. Senator Hale's re-election PAC, and a think tank that writes bioethics white papers for the same committee that oversees Aegis grants. I tasted metal that was not blood. We do not need one trial, I said. We need orchestration, Eleanor, Alex said, already dialing. We did not go home. We went to Eleanor, because some wars require a conductor. She listened to Noah's outline with the attention of a sniper. Then she closed her eyes and mapped an old world onto a new one. We will use the task force, she said. Not because they are brave, but because they want to be seen as brave. We will use the senator's vanity. We will use the church's fear of scandal. And we will use something none of them are prepared for. What? I asked. Your face, she said. You will speak tonight. No, Alex said. Too fast. Eleanor turned to him, and for once her voice softened before it hardened. Miles, the storm has already named her. The only way through is to rename yourself faster. He stared at me like a man trying to memorize a coast before the tide came in. You do not owe them your skin, he said. I owe the children in those files, I answered. And my mother. And your father. And the version of you that believed science was a lantern before this house taught you how to cast shadows. He closed his eyes once, long. When he opened them, the part of him that prefers control had shaken hands with the part that understands surrender. Then we do it loud, he said. We do it so clean they can't dirty it without bleeding publicly. Preparations felt like triage. The PR team wanted lighting and language that made donors comfortable. Eleanor fired them and called a newsroom that still remembered how to be an institution. The task force tried to delay the press until they could own it. Eleanor handed them a timeline with bullet points labeled consequences. Noah stitched Parliament's path into a visual that even bad Faith could not pretend to misunderstand. Vivian called 3 board chairs and made them cry without raising her voice. I chose a dress that looked like a refusal and wrote words that sounded like stitches. When the hour came, the lights were colder than the day, and the microphones looked like insects with good manners. I stood at a lectern in a room too small for the number of eyes inside it, and told Southport a story in present tense. What is being done to you, not what was done to someone else far away last century. I showed them maps with parish names stamped into satellite bands and bank accounts, wearing rosaries, and legislation written by the same hands that laundered its ethics. I told them my mother's line. Healing is not conquest, it is return. And I asked a question that felt like a hand extended and a threat. Would you like to be the city that returns? Or the city that is conquered slowly by its own convenience? When I finished, the room forgot how to fill silence. Then it remembered. Questions turned into accusations, turned into gratitude, turned back into questions. Outside, the crowd cheered, booed, prayed, and filmed. Somewhere across town, Damien watched on a screen that had not been logged. Somewhere in D.C., a senator's aide composed a tweet that would not age well. Back at the house, Alex stood with his hands useless and his eyes full. "You sounded like a person who could carry me," he said, then shook his head as if embarrassed by the sentence. "I mean the city. Carry the city." "I knew what you meant," I said. And I will," I answered, "if you help me set it down when it gets heavy." He exhaled as if air had finally chosen him. Eleanor came to the doorway with a phone that had forgotten how to be quiet. "The task force is unsealing. The senator has agreed to recuse himself. The church will open its books. Damien will be arrested before dawn." "That is not the end," I said. "It is a beginning," she replied. "Beginnings are the most honest lies we tell ourselves to survive ends." After she left, I went to my room and set the Codex on the bed the way you set a child down, when you know sleep is a negotiation. I traced the green veins in the metal and spoke to it under my breath as if it had always been listening. I told it the world was learning a new word, return. I told it some men would still try to conquer it and fail in new ways. I asked it to forgive me for using it as bait. If you had been there, would you have asked a book for mercy, or is mercy only for people who have not learned how to hold a blade and a blessing in the same hand? I slept badly, and then not at all. Near dawn, when the city goes soft as if it might be forgiven, a text arrived from a number that had never introduced itself. I prefer ends to beginnings. See you at the harbor. Bring your compass. No prayers. It was signed with nothing. It did not need a name. We knew his handwriting by now. I did not answer Damien's message. I let it sit on the screen until the letters felt like they were breathing, and then I memorized the shape of the threat and put the phone face down the way you put a blade back in its sheath when you decide you will still need it. Later, and before the sun could decide what kind of day it wanted to be, I went to the terrace where the city looked half forgiven and told Eleanor he had called me compass. She did not smile. She did that small stillness she uses when the world says checkmate and she is counting squares. And she said, "We go to the harbor, but we do not go alone." And she called a prosecutor who owed her a favor, big enough to have its own wardrobe. And she called a journalist who had waited 5 years to be brave and public again. And she called a judge who had learned to be tired of decorum in the exact way that makes decorum dangerous to men like Damien. And then she looked at me the way only people who know how much you can carry look, and she said, "You will bring the Codex, because he expects to smell it, but you will not open it, because we are not opening anything for a man who can't keep his hands from renaming what is not his." I found Alex in the hall buttoning a shirt, like it was the only thing in the house that would obey him. And I told him harbor, and he said, "I am coming." And I said, "The message said no prayers." And he said, "Then I will bring something else." And he reached into a drawer and closed his hand around a name he had been practicing in the dark and came away with nothing you could see but everything you could hear. And he said if he wants Miles Knight, he can have him, but he can't keep him. And we left before Vivian could weaponize worry, and Noah slid a map across the hood of his van in the driveway and traced blue lines like veins from a satellite bounce he called Parliament to a private pier at the far end of the docks where the water sounded like it was chewing glass. And he said there will be 3 cameras we can't hack, and 2 we already own, and a blind spot that looks like an accident and is not. And he said their uplink rides the church's umbrella to a think tank's backbone, to a senator's firewall, to a donor's yacht. And I said, you are speaking theology. And he said, I am speaking logistics. And he gave me an ear cuff, the color of nothing, and told me to breathe evenly if anyone aimed a microphone at my pulse, because fear makes feedback. And I asked him if he would run if I told him to, and he said I would run if you asked, but I would prefer to stay because my cowardice has learned to wear shoes, and it wants to see how far we can walk. And on the drive down the hill, the clouds came in low and deliberate, the kind that make daylight look like a rehearsal for something more honest. The harbor was awake in the way living things wake when they know someone is trying to rename them. Cranes bowing like old men who still remember how to riot. Fog cutting the edges off a skyline that had never earned its sharpness. Gulls arguing with engines, and the pier he had chosen looked like a finger pointing at nothing good. Rosa met us on the service road in a coat that did not fit, her face stripped of lipstick and other defenses, and she said he came early and he is patient, and that is worse than early, and Eleanor nodded once and said patience is just vanity that learned manners, and we walked. There are places where time thins, where seconds become bright needles and stitch you into yourself, whether you like your shape or not. The pier did that. The boards creaked like confessions. The water licked the pylons with a rhythm that wanted to be a lullaby and was not. Damien stood at the end of the world in a coat, the color of dried blood. His hair gentleman, his eyes inventory, and around him were men who knew how to be furniture with triggers, and a priest in plain clothes, pretending to be a seagull. And he opened his arms as if we were late to a party he had thrown in our honor, and he said, Mrs. Fox, or do we call you MS? Hart again, or do we try Evelyn, because I prefer syllables that do not pretend to be legal. And then he turned his head the way cats do when they are about to put a paw where you keep a glass, and he said, Miles Knight without looking at Alex, and if you had been me, you would have watched for a flinch. I watched, and he did not flinch. He said, I am whoever I need to be to end this, and I believed him, not because he sounded sure, but because he sounded tired. Damien smiled like a man remembering a private joke he intends to spend on the poor, and he said, bring the Codex. And I lifted the case between my palms, and the metal warmed the way a sleeping animal warms when it recognizes the step of someone who has fed it. And he said, set it there and step back and pretend you trust me. And I said, I do not have to pretend that I do not trust you. And I set it down anyway, because choreography is sometimes a weapon. And he brushed the casing with 2 fingers, like a lover whose favorite feeling is owning. And he said, do you ever think about what it means to deserve a secret? And I said, constantly. And he said, then, I deserve this one. And I said, you deserve consequences. And he laughed lightly, like someone loosening his tie on the way to a microphone. Somewhere behind me, Noah said in my ear, the uplink is hot and the yacht is listening, and Parliament is hungry. I said, feed it. He said, I am. Eleanor stood to my left with her cane like a conductor's baton, and to my right, Alex inhaled the way you do before diving. And Damien looked at the water like it was a mirror. He trusted more than people and said the thing about healing is that it gets in the way of profit. And the thing about profit is that it pays for healing at scale, if you believe in the right arithmetic. And he turned and took one step toward me and said, "Open it." And I said, "No." And he said, "Then let me." And I said, "You want to conquer it?" And he said, "Of course." And I said, "Then you will misread it." And he said, "I have misread better things and still won." And he lifted a hand, and 2 men moved, and one took a small step too wide. And that was the kind of mistake you hear in your spine. Eleanor's cane tapped once, and the sound traveled like a verdict, and from the fog came the slow shape of a patrol boat and the faster shape of a news drone and the quiet shape of a black SUV with plates that say, "I have permission." And Damien did not look surprised. He looked pleased. He said, "Finally," and he glanced at the priest, and the priest dropped his eyes like a man putting down a gun. And Damien said, "Do you believe in salvation?" And I said, "I believe in return." And he said, "Charming." And then he told the truth by accident and said, "I believe in appetite." And Noah whispered, "We have the buyer's handshake, and the senator's aide's burner, and the church treasurer's late-night confession disguised as invoice." And I said, "Say when?" And he said, "Say now." And I said, "Now." And the drone fell out of the fog like a decision, and the patrol boat's loudspeaker said full names in a voice that had learned how to be God in neighborhoods that could not afford an appeal. And the judge on the dock behind us looked 10 years older than his robe, but younger than his eyes, and the prosecutor beside him held a warrant steady enough to light a candle with, and the moment became a courtroom with splinters. Damien did not run. He did that other thing old predators do, when the ground finally remembers how to be gravity. He smiled like a teacher who has graded a test he wrote himself, and he said to the patrol boat, "You are late," and to the drone, "You are vain," and to me, "You are not finished." And he reached, not for a weapon, but for the lock. And I decided I was tired of his hands naming things, so I stepped into his reach and put my palm flat over the slit. And I said, "You do not get to undress a body you have already tried to sell. Not even a metal one." And he leaned in close enough for me to smell the price of his cologne and said, "You think you are a compass." And I said, "I am a return." And I do not know if that sentence mattered to anyone but me, but it steadied the air, and then the men with badges did their choreography, and the men with triggers mistook it for someone else's music and tried to play along. And the pier became the kind of place where time staggers, and you count not bullets, but bad decisions. Alex moved once, hard, and the nearest wrist forgot that it believed in obeying, and a gun went into the water like a sin that had earned gravity. And Rosa said, "I am sorry to no one and everyone," and ran toward a gap I did not see, until she was almost through it, and a hand caught her coat and tore the fabric, but not her, and she made it to our cal side, like the word witness finding a verb. If you had been me, would you have wanted him dragged in handcuffs, or walked in so dignified the cuffs felt like costume? He chose costume. He looked at the judge and recited case law with a courtesy that pretended to be helpless. And I watched the prosecutor show him the claws that had learned to live for exactly men like him. And the priest did not bless anyone, but he took off his collar and put it in his pocket like a man taking responsibility for laundry, and the drone saw everything. I wished it had not, and that was the point. And Alex, whose name had learned to wear a ghost, stood where the camera could call him Alexander, 'cause that was the only name that would matter in a frame that would be replayed. And he said one sentence. He said, "This family will cooperate entirely." And he looked at me when he said family, and I filed the word under returns. They took Damien not easily and not gently, but legally enough for the headlines to choose the word arrested over the word captured. And when the pier remembered how to be wood again, and the water remembered how to be water, Eleanor leaned her cane on the rail and said, "It is not over." And I said, "I know." And she said, "Do you?" And the question was a hand on my shoulder that was not a comfort. And I said, "Say the rest." And she said, "The Codex will become what a nation decides it is." And nations have very bad taste in miracles. And she looked at the case like a grandmother looks at a child who will grow up beautiful and unloved if the neighborhood does not change. And she said, "We must decide where to open it and how to refuse when the right people ask us to be wrong politely." On the way back up the hill, the sky split in a way that made every window reflective, like Southport wanted to see its own face before the news taught it a new one. Vivian called and did not wait for hello. She said, "Are you safe?" And I said, "Define safe." And she said, "Breathing." And I said, "Then yes." And she cried in a whisper because some rich people only learned how to weep in lowercase. And Noah said, "In my ear, Parliament is dead. We killed it. But the church's umbrella will try to grow new ribs, and the senator will change staff and call it reform, and the think tank will publish a paper about the ethics of lessons learned, by which it means how to keep the money next time." And I said, "Then we will learn louder." At the house, Eleanor convened a tiny war room that looked like family, pretending to be a board. The prosecutor sent a message that read, "Consider your faces public property for 48 hours. The judge sent another that read, "Do not run. It looks like guilt." The journalist sent a third that read, "We can hold the line if you give us a line to hold." Alex stood at the window with both names on his back and said, "I am so tired of being the weather." And I said, "Then be the shore." And he looked at me like a man who wanted to lay down something heavy, somewhere safe, and did not know if such a place could be a person. And I said, "I can hold you as long as you hold this with me." And he said, "What is this?" And I said, "Consequence." When night came, the city dimmed to a confession. I took the Codex to the library because rooms remember what they were built for. And I ran my fingers over the millennia of stubborn in its seams and asked it for patience I had not earned. And Alex came in quiet and stood close enough that we shared a temperature. And he said, "I have spent my life translating other people's versions of me." And I said, "Then write your own." And he said, "Do you want it to be Miles or Alexander?" And I said, "I want it to be the one who bleeds and still believes in return." And he said that one does not have a name yet. And I said, "We can ask the morning to lend us one." Somewhere near 2 a.m., the phone on the table lit the way phones do when they carry the kind of news you can feel in your teeth. It was a single line from an agent who had found a second spine in time, warrant executed, night in federal custody, arraignment at 9, and I let my lungs trade places with my ribs. And I said, "Finally," and I did not know whether I meant mercy or momentum. Before I slept, or the thing that wore sleep's clothes, I wrote a single sentence in my notebook because sentences are the only maps I trust at the end of days like this. If return is the opposite of conquest, then tomorrow we give back what hunger stole, and we call it medicine. And we do it in a room with too much light, and we do it with our names pronounced correctly. And if anyone asks why we did not open the Codex for a man who wanted to eat it, we will say, because some mouths are not meant for miracles. And because you have been with me, from the alley to the auction to the edge of the water, tell me, if you were me and the keys were heavy and the city was suddenly listening, would you unlock the box in a lab where the law can supervise the breathing, or on a stage where the light can shame anyone who tries to steal again? Or would you keep it closed one day longer, just to remind the hungry that not every door opens to hands that have only learned to take? I ask because in the morning I will choose, and choices taste better when they have been said out loud. I woke before the sun and decided that if endings were real, they should sound like breath returning to a room that had only ever practiced holding it. So I dressed in the color of decisions, tied my hair the way my mother did when she wanted a scalpel to feel welcome, tucked the Codex into the soft sleeve Eleanor had sewn from an old curtain she swore once belonged to a courtroom, and walked the length of the hall where portraits hung like patient verdicts. Outside, Southport was rinsed thin by a pale light that did not know yet whether to forgive. And as I stepped onto the terrace, Eleanor was already there, cane across her knees, eyes carrying an ocean that had learned not to beg the shore. "Today," she said, not asking. "Today," I answered, and she said the lab is ready. The press is leashed, the judge has awakened his better angels, and the task force has promised to behave like one. Then she looked at my hands, as if checking whether the choice had blistered me in the night, and added, "You can still refuse the spectacle." I told her I was not bringing the Codex to a stage to teach the city how to clap. I was bringing it to a room with glass walls. So anyone who tried to lie about what we did would have to lie to their reflection. Alex came out with coffee. He had made himself strong, imperfect, kind, and said the arraignment was at 9. Damien would plead a vocabulary so elegant a weaker city would swoon. And the senator had already scheduled his apology for 2, and I asked if he would come to the lab with me or take his name to court, and he stared at the horizon like a man deciding where to plant a flag and said both, and I said then we run together. And he said together like a promise that had learned to speak in a house where vows usually drowned. In the car, the Codex lay across my lap like a sleeping animal that trusted me more than it should. Noah's voice filled the cabin through the comm unit he would wired into our dash, saying the lab had sealed their clean room. Backup power had been tested. External feeds were routed through a dead man's switch that would flood the internet if someone tried to edit our fax. And the church umbrella had retracted for the day, as if weather could be instructed by embarrassment. Vivian texted a single line, "Be cruel to the lie," and I felt a split second of love for the way. She had learned to place her knives on the right plate. The lab waited on the 12th floor of a hospital that had lived through 3 bankruptcies and 1 rebirth. Its windows squared against the harbor, its corridors smelling like lemon and the sweat of people who refused to quit. Dr. Alvarez met us at the door in powder blue scrubs and an expression that believed in procedure the way other people believe in saints, and behind her came a team with names stitched above their hearts: geneticist, immunologist, archivist, ethicist, each carrying a stillness that meant they would rehearse this ethics more times than the city had rehearsed outrage. We signed so many forms, the pens grew tired. Then we stepped into the airlock and let the room scrub us clean of politics. Through the glass. Cameras watched without blinking. Feeds split to a courtroom, a newsroom, a classroom, in a neighborhood that had been told miracles were for certain zip codes only. I placed the Codex on the steel, the case humming faintly like a cello at rest, and as the team arranged their tools, Dr. Alvarez asked the only question that mattered, what happens if it opens? And I said, we read, not worship, and if the reading asks us to harm, we close it again and call that fidelity. He would have laughed, Damien, at the humility of it, the refusal to crown a book king. I kept him in the corner of my mind, because keeping your enemy near is just a secular name for inoculation, and as I traced the green veins with a gloved fingertip, I heard my mother's voice tell me, as she always had in the last solid dream, that healing is return, not conquest, and I asked the room, quietly but on record, will we return what was stolen breath to the voiceless, names to the erased, standards to the places that forgot they could say no, and the ethicist said yes, like a contract signed by a spine. I lifted the shadow key Noah had modified into an honest, witness no trick cables, no deceit, only a sense line that would print a perfect log of our touch, and I fit it to the slit and paused the way surgeons pause before making the kind of cut that could either teach the body how to remember itself or convince it to panic. If you were me, would you have turned then? Or would you have let the silence ripen just a second longer so the choice could learn the taste of air? I turned. No sound at first. Only the soft shift of something that had outlived its maker and still believed in purpose. The bezels loosened. The seam exhaled. The lid lifted like a breath unknotted, and inside lay not a Bible of immortality, not a weapon, not a manifesto, but paper. So much paper. Layered sheets sealed in waxed membranes, script hand drawn with a precision that felt like prayer, diagrams of organs, annotated with ordinary words, rearranged to mean courage, protocols written as sequences of humility, stepwise recoveries for bodies that had been asked to endure unthinkable storms, trauma regimens that wove surgery to nutrition to shelter to counseling to time. Immune mapping that treated communities like organisms capable of inflammation and healing. Checklists that punished arrogance and rewarded persistence. Margins full of notes written in two hands, one sure, one meticulous, arguing gently about what should be tested in mice and what should never be tested in anything that can say please. Dr. Alvarez read first, lips moving once as if to set a cadence. Then she handed a page to the geneticist, who nodded as if remembering a melody, and the archivist said the oldest pages were newer than legend, but older than the worst corruption, and the ethicist cried without apology. When she reached a line that said, do not lengthen life at the cost of dignity, teach dignity, and life will learn your face. I thought of my mother on the steps of the archives, laughing at weather, holding a copy she was not allowed to keep. I thought of Phineas, the way Eleanor said his hands shook when he sealed a set after deciding the century was not ready. I thought of the offshore reports, the children blurred by pity and by intent, and I said on the record that the Codex did not promise forever. It promised a discipline of return, and I asked Southport if it wanted that more than it wanted a headline. The door to the airlock buzzed. Eleanor's face appeared behind the glass, composed like a verdict delivered in the exact tone that keeps a city from choosing the wrong riot. She held up her phone with the court's live stream Damien in a suit newer than his soul, flanked by counsel pleading not guilty with a voice that remembered every dinner party that had ever mistaken his appetite for charm. The judge denied bail with language that belonged in scripture, and the prosecutor read into the record a chain of custody that made Parliament sound like a toy God forgot to animate. I watched Alex in the gallery, jaw set, eyes steady, not Miles, not a ghost, only a man who had decided to be exactly one person in public, because the city had asked for that much courage, and he had finally learned how to offer it without apology. We resumed. Page after page, the Codex built a cathedral of science without superstition, and every column had 3 names carved into it. The patient, the caregiver, the boundary. I found sections on triage, in flood zones, antibiotic stewardship, written like a parable for mayors. Neonatal protocols, printed with a warning that read, if you cannot guarantee warmth, do not pretend to offer life. And beneath it, in smaller script, warmth can be a person if you hold correctly. I wanted to call my mother from the next room, like a child who had learned her lines, but instead, I stood where I was and said them out loud to cameras. I hoped we're in classrooms. When we reached the last layer, a sealed envelope weighted with an intact wax mark, stamped with an E that might have been Eleanor's, but was not. And the archivist said, "Founders often left a letter to the next hands," and I opened it with the smallest scissors because ceremony matters when you are asking the dead for help. Inside, 1 page only, a hand that was neither of the first 2, more precise, almost shy, writing in a language the translator app on the station rendered as imperfect English that still walked like poetry. Guardianship means refusing to perform miracles on demand. If they ask you to prove mercy with spectacle, give them work instead. If they ask you to cure mortality, teach them to love mornings. Heal what is near. Return what is stolen. All else is hunger. I handed it to the ethicist, who read it twice like a person who had been thirsty for a long time and finally believed the water. We documented everything, photographs, scans, typed transcripts, then closed the case. Not because it frightened us, but because its opening had ended. And returns are only returns if they are practiced, not displayed. We signed the log, time-stamped the feeds, and stepped out into air that had learned our names. The hospital lobby held a press pool that smelled like bright lights and rehearsed sincerity. I kept the Codex tucked to my side and walked to the podium without speech cards because I had already written the only sentence I trusted in my notebook at 2 a.m. I said the Codex was not magic, and it was not mine, and it was not a key to forever. It was a manual for dignity, and we would publish its contents in full to any hospital, clinic, shelter, school, or kitchen table that wanted to practice return, and we would not sell it to a man with a yacht. I said we would establish an open archive overseen by people who do not name wings after themselves. And our first acts would be small on purpose: warm cribs, stocked clinics, trained neighborhood medics, because scale without humility is just a larger mistake. Then I asked the question I had been carrying since the alley. If you were me and the city was finally listening, Would you hand it a crown or a chore list? And I said I chose the chore list and asked it to join me. Reporters asked whether this was a betrayal of the fox fortune. I said, fortunes that cannot survive. Honesty should become history. They asked whether I believed Damien was a monster. I said monsters are convenient metaphors for systems that pay salaries, and we were dismantling both. They asked whether I loved my husband, and I said love is not a press statement, and then surprised myself by adding, yes, I love him when he is most himself. And I intend to help the city be that brave too. In the afternoon, we drove to the courthouse, because endings deserve witnesses. The arraignment bled into a hearing on assets, and the judge spoke with the patience of a man who knew how long marble takes to learn new words. Freezing accounts, unspooling shells, ordering custody of the foundation to an interim board that included Dr. Alvarez, an nurse from the South Side, a teacher who had lost a child to a trial she had not consented to, and, at Eleanor's insistence, a pastor from a church that had refused the umbrella and sheltered parishioners without photographing all them for newsletters. Damien's team tried 3 different temperaments: outrage, pity, technicality, and each cracked against the same wall. Receipts. When court adjourned, he turned in slow profile toward Alex and inclined his head as if acknowledging a rival at the end of a tournament that had always bored him slightly. And I understood that some men never enter a story to be redeemed, only to measure themselves against resistance. I held his gaze for 1 heartbeat and then gave it back to the hallway. The city's noise softened as we climbed the hill at dusk. Noah peeled off to deliver servers to a university where graduate students would spend the night teaching the Codex how to be searchable. Vivian announced she had resigned from 3 boards and joined one that had the audacity to call itself Plain Aid. The judge texted a grainy photo of the order appointing the interim board. The caption reading, "Do the work and let the law catch up." Eleanor, uncharacteristically quiet, asked to see the letter from the last page again. And when we reached the library, I gave it to her. She read it once and then placed it on the table as if it had weight the table should learn to carry. "I knew phantoms, not authors," she said, a softness under the steel. "I spent my life protecting a door because I did not trust the hands. I forgot to teach the hands." I told her guardianship could be both, lock and lesson, and she smiled, the smile she used exactly twice a year, and said, "Then teach me." And I said, "Tomorrow we go to the clinic with warm cribs." And she said, "Tonight we eat soup like mortals." After dinner, in a house that had finally learned how to arrange itself around something other than fear, Alex walked with me to the terrace, where the harbor was a darker mirror, and he said he would read the transcript of the line I would give in the press and wanted to know whether love was a chore list or a crown. And I said both, but the crown is made of hands. And he laughed like a man encountering forgiveness in a room that had previously only hosted verdicts. He reached for my palm and paused, the way he had paused over the Codex, and asked without speaking whether he had the right. And I gave it, because consent is how doors should open, and our fingers found the temperature other people spend years naming. "Evelyn," he said, like an answer to a question he would been taught to ask incorrectly, "will you help me return to myself?" And I told him there was no self to return to, only the one we practice each day. And we would practice him until the city recognized him without a program. The night could have ended there, but endings test their own seals, so when the phone rang again and the agent's voice carried a new caution, I knew we had one more hinge to turn. There is chatter, he said, an appeal to move the Codex under federal custody, citing national heritage and chain of custody risk. And I asked if national heritage ever changed a diaper, and he apologized for repeating his brief. I thanked him for warning us and asked whether a public trust filed by the interim board and backed by the hospital network could complicate the grab. And he said it could make them sweat on record. Eleanor drew up the papers before midnight, her pen sharper than the law wanted to admit. And we filed them in a courthouse that had never slept through a scandal. By morning, the petition would be news, and by noon it would be an outcome. Sleep found us, finally, not as a gift, but as a truce. I dreamed of the alley without blood, only rain, and of a kiss that had never been about want, but about air. And when I woke, air was what the day felt like. We drove back to the hospital without an escort, because sometimes safety looks like belonging, and we carried the Codex with us not like a trophy, but like a tool. In the lobby, a crowd had gathered, not cameras, but people who looked like Tuesdays, nurses off shift. A bus driver with his uniform shirt tucked in like he meant it. A woman with a stroller and a look that said she had counted nights by coughs and now wanted to count mornings by laughter. I walked slow so the day could keep up, and the crowd opened the way human water opens when it recognizes a body carrying something fragile but necessary. An old man touched the sleeve of the case and said, "Give it back to us." And I said, "That is all it knows how to do." In the lab, Dr. Alvarez had already begun turning the pages into protocols, posting open files to a public repository with a license that forbade hoarding. The neonatal team assembled their first warmth kits, blankets, skin to skin, instructions printed with kindness instead of condescension, tiny caps that looked like Hope had learned to knit. The ER built a checklist to prevent what the Codex called panic amputations, cuts of muscle and infrastructure demanded by politicians in a hurry, now replaced by time-boxed pauses, community consults, transparent metrics anyone could read. A pharmacy tech taped a note above the antibiotic shelf. Return what works. Retire what flatters. I wrote to the districts with no clinics and told them we would drive. That return has wheels when it must. I asked the city to donate not money, but mornings, drivers, kitchens, classrooms that wanted to learn first aid and learn it again until it was a song. I asked myself, privately, whether my mother would be satisfied with this ending, and I heard her laugh through a memory and say, "Endings are just the day you finally admit you will keep going." The petition held. The federal appeal blinked in the noon light and decided to be a collaboration instead of a theft. The court established the Southport Return Trust, with the Codex as foundational archive and our city as custodian, under a charter that made selling the thing as illegal as renaming it. Damien's bail remained denied. The senator announced a sabbatical that sounded like a long way of saying permanent. The church returned 3 grants with an apology note that used the word penance correctly. Parliament stayed dead. The think tank published a correction that read like an unlearning. At sunset, we stood again on the terrace, soup bowls empty. the city below us, holding its own weight with a competence that did not need a soundtrack. Eleanor took my hand and said, "This is where I apologize." And I said, "For what?" And she said, "For using the debt to haul you home." And I told her, guardianship asks for ugliness sometimes, and she had paid with honesty. And she said, "I forgot how to say thank you." And I said, "You are saying it now." And she squeezed my fingers and let go like a woman who had practice returning things. Alex came to my other side and asked whether I wanted to keep my name or take his, and I said I wanted to keep mine and learn his better. And he said, "That is the only answer that sounds like a door I want to walk through." And we kissed, not like survival, not like apology, but like punctuation at the end of a long sentence that had finally learned what it wanted to say. Later, when the house had gone thoughtful and the harbor had put on its darker shirt, I took the Codex to the library one last time, not to open it, but to thank it. I wrote in my notebook the truth I had earned, that I chose to open the box in a lab where the law could supervise the breathing, and the light could shame anyone who tried to steal again, that the pages told us how to return, not how to conquer, that the city wanted the chore list more than the crown, and that love, the kind you can practice in public, is just the daily work of handing breath back to people who forgot they were allowed to want it. And because stories are permitted, one last question, when they end honestly. I will ask you this, now that the door breathes and the room is full of mornings, if someone comes to you with a miracle for sale, will you ask them who it returns to, or will you let them name you a customer? I hope you ask. Because today we learned the answer, and I have written it down. Where even hunger must read it, heal what is near, return what was stolen, and let the rest learn your face.